Darren Cleary, he's back, baby.
Me?
What are the forums saying this morning? I'm sure you've been all over it.
I haven't been onto the forum.
Did you get yourself mixed up with Diarmuid Connolly?
Yeah, I did actually. He's back. I got excited by Adrian's introduction there. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty good
excited?
news. I would be excited because selfishly you want to see a player of that quality play. You can always offer something. There was a misconception that Dublin had the depth, but 2 years ago in an All-Ireland final he dragged us through sheer force of will. Him coming off the bench at half-time changed the outlook of the game, so I still think he's a massive influence to have and a really important guy to have. And Kieran Cunningham made the point last week that if Conor McHugh comes off the bench, the guy who's going to mark him will say, right, I've got a good chance of marking this guy. But just the size of the personality, the scale of what Diarmuid Connolly is as a player would be much more intimidating coming off the bench, even if he mightn't be at the power as he was 2 years ago, having played minimal football over the last 18 months. As
our chief pro Dublin and regular spokesperson, is there not a sense of with the train analogy, it's on the tracks and it's heading along at a nice steady kind of 60 kilometres an hour, and it is going to get over the line no matter what happens, and collect that sort of 5 in a row, and then suddenly there's this little rogue element. There's a party happening in carriage 5 and it potentially may derail this entire thing.
I don't think the train has ever been smoothly sailing along or going along the tracks with no bother. I think the All-Ireland finals have been tight, with the exception of last year. I think there's a little bit of recency bias in that it was such a one-sided final. We assumed that Dublin have steamrolled teams over the last few years. They haven't. The Mayo rivalries were great, the replays were good, and was only ever a kick or a score between them. I am the most pessimistic Dublin fan because I remember the dark days. I remember the bad times. Yeah, but
how can you be pessimistic now? Because I mean, they're not blitzing teams, but they're still beating teams consistently.
But I got to the age of 22, and we'd only won one All Ireland in my lifetime. So winning All Irelands and even getting to finals was this mad thing that you couldn't achieve it. It wasn't going to happen. You were so used to being a team that would be pretty competitive in Leinster.
How many All Irelands are Dublin going to have to win before you forget that? Before you become less pessimistic?
You should never forget it. Because I genuinely believe that it is cyclical.
If Dublin have won 10 All-Irelands in a row, at that point will you start...
That's stupid. That's never happened.
Well, listen, I mean,
it's not.
Let's reconvene in 6 years' time.
We can reconvene in 6 years' time. They mightn't win this year. Like the people who are saying it's nailed on are insane. Genuine insane. No, I'm not having it at all.
It's absolutely the amount of shite we have to put up with here on Friday, Darren, with Adrian talking nonsense about Dublin and
10 in a row. You heard it here first, folks.
I don't buy it. The Sherlock thing is one that as well that has added a lot of questions. I don't understand this at all. Jason Sherlock was so eager to get back involved with Dublin, a bit like Dessie Farrell. His career ended in a pretty unceremonious way in that he was just stopped being picked when he felt he had something to offer. I think he had a point to prove. I think he's proved that because his introduction, from talking to some of the Dublin players, he was instrumental. Jayo is a persona. He's more than just a player and a coach. He is a guy that they looked up to, and they would have aspired to be as kids. So having him around, and we talk about marginal gains, the 1 or 2% a player like that will give you. I can't understand why he would leave. Like, I watched the documentary and I don't know if I'd buy into that put a strain on the relationship.
Because I was trying to figure out earlier on, I haven't watched it, I can't remember, and I'll have to watch it back, but what was in it specifically that irked Jim Gavin?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And Jim Gavin has been friends with Sherlock for more than 20 years. They were on that 95 team together. I don't think they would have a relationship that would be put under serious strain, that would make Sherlock walk away from something that he really enjoys, something that has been the main identifier as him as a person, has been Jason Sherlock, the Dublin footballer, for the last 20 years.
So party relations were strained before that, and then this was a tipping point that led to the parting of the ways, says the report. So I don't know what the relationship would have been strained before that. What's going to be very interesting though, Darren, and this is a question for you, Jim Gavin's going to be asked about this at the weekend. What's he going to say? Pretend you're Jim Gavin. So Jim, what's...
you do that every time you're in anyway, so...
So Jim, Jason Sherlock's left your backroom team. What happens?
He's a volunteer. He volunteers his time, and like any volunteer, he can do what he wants with his time.
Yeah, that's a good line.
That's what he'll say. So the idea that we'll get to the end of it...
So would you voluntarily have left...
do you write Jim Gavin speeches?
I don't write Jim Gavin speeches.
Would you voluntarily leave when the greatest achievements in the history of Gaelic football is on the line?
No, I wouldn't voluntarily leave, which makes it more interesting, but I can't, for the life of me, come to believe that they fell out over a documentary that was so inconsequential. I think
that's part of it, maybe. I think, if we're taking everything we read here as fact, like, there was a strained relationship before that.
But we're not. You weren't actually saying that he voluntarily left. You're saying that he was a volunteer.
He was volunteer.
That doesn't mean that he voluntarily left.
Well, I doubt
you can be a volunteer and be shoved.
He's not. He hasn't.
Or you can be a volunteer and walk.
To be honest, I don't know. I don't understand the specifics, but something must have happened beyond the documentary, because there was nothing in the documentary that would suggest that it would have been any kind of betrayal of trust. I think those players are weird in that they have this odd sense of, we are going to be a tight-knit group and we won't say anything. They're some of the most marketable people in Irish sport.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of them should be making a lot of money. The only one that's probably capitalised on their potential to earn money from what they do in sport has been Bernard Brogan. The rest of them, despite their massive sporting success and despite the fact they're pretty marketable people, have taken an odd pride in deciding we don't want to earn anything from the brand we've created by being really good and really successful at football. I don't understand it.
I'm just hoping that the journalists who are present at this game over the weekend push Jim Gavin enough to, sort of quality journalists that are down there, Darren, at this game, to sort of get an answer out of Jim Gavin. What do you think, Owen?
Yeah, I hope they do too.
You're there.
There's in a non-journalistic capacity. I don't know. We'll see.
Are you there in a non-journalistic capacity?
No, I'm there in a journalistic capacity.
Okay.
No journalist has ever got an answer out of Jim Gavin. Jim will tell you what he wants to tell you, and he will not tell us what happened here. So we're not going to know. It'll be speculate, and it'll be a while before the full story emerges. You're
not a volunteer. You're paid to be here to give us your sports bulletin. So
I will give you the sports bulletin.
We're going to talk Diarmuid Connolly's return to Dublin, Jason Sherlock's departure, and Kerry 09 versus Dublin 18. That's coming your way in the next few minutes. Ger Gilroy is going to join us in the studio to get stuck into all of that. Get your comments coming into us. But before that, an interesting nugget from Carlos Paul Broderick last summer about Jayo's NFL-style play calling for the Dubs.
What about this?
So they might have a call. You'll always try and identify calls. We played Dublin last year, and I never heard as many calls.
Really?
I was baffled by the amount of calls that they had.
And what are the calls? What's Stephen Cluxton saying?
Well, they were numbers. I remember Jason Sherlock running onto the field. A lot of them were numbers. And to be honest with you, there's still have 15 players in the field who can only set up in X amount of different formations. But I suppose the way in which you call it out allows them to kind of maybe confuse their opponent for a little bit longer, and they probably change those names every game. So I can't say which. It's just maybe when you identify one that has been a consistent pattern, that if the coach notices it, he says it. But just as often, I suppose, we're a kind of an aged and experienced team in many ways, and you might have a player in the field who notices something and the word just spreads, so it changes. That's all.
Just one last question on that Dublin calls thing, because I haven't heard that before. So Sherlock's running onto the pitch, and is he shouting a number to Cluxton, or is he giving Cluxton
No, generally this could be across the middle of the pitch. So even I was standing at 11 for some of that game, and I heard calls, 44 different calls like this, and they obviously mean something. Now for us, I don't know whether they were for their own kick out or for the opposition kick out. It depended. So sometimes there was a call when they had a kick out, sometimes there was a call when we had a kick out. But the large amount of them were for how they attacked our kick outs. Because I suppose for Cluxton's kick outs, we dropped back at the time. So they didn't need to. They could kick the ball to the nearest man. He was free. So a lot of it was for how they were approaching our kick outs.
Jared, good morning to you.
How you doing?
If I'm listening to that and I'm Owen's crew over there, or I'm Mayo, or I'm Tyrone or Donegal, I'm pretty encouraged for the year ahead.
That Jayo's gone?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, we don't know if Sherlock was coming up with those instructions himself. What was interesting to me about that, it's interesting now in the context of this now, but at the time when I was discussing that with Paul Broderick, it was the idea that in-game they're getting instructions into Cluxton. We always think that Cluxton just surveys, kind of like Tom Brady, he surveys what's going on in front of him and then just makes a decision on that. Now, of course, Brady goes back to the sideline quite often, as we saw in the Super Bowl last week, but clearly Dublin have this constant carousel of information.
And he was the one, Jayo, every game you saw, in and off.
But that's in his runner capacity. His actual coaching capacity was as a forwards coach. So that's what I'm trying to say. I don't think...
But you don't think he was surely on the pitch delivering instructions, either of his own making or by whoever else's?
I doubt they were. I doubt they were all from Jason Sherlock's making. Maybe a very small amount would have been, but to Stephen Cluxton, I don't think he's coming up with those. So, as much as I'd like to overstate how big this loss is going to be from a Stephen Cluxton point of view, I don't think that those instructions were coming from Sherlock himself.
It's going to have an impact on Dublin no matter what, right? If you've got a coach who's so involved, he's the attack coach and he's coming up with plays and he's a part of the person that's coming up with these basketball plays or whatever it is, not an insignificant part no matter what way you shape it.
What if that work's already done and they've sucked him dry with information, and now comes Paul Clark and they're going to add him to the mix, and it's the progression, because ultimately what do we think what do we think is the most important part of the Dublin setup, right? If you think about it, what is the single most important part of the Dublin setup? It has to be Jim Gavin. He is the one who put this coaching ticket in place. He's the one who decides what players come or go, and he's the one who ultimately is responsible for dictating the style of play. So he brings coaches in, and I would say Jim Gavin is talking to a lot of other coaches from other sports and stealing ideas and looking at stuff and going, oh, I like a little bit of what you're doing. Like, we know Jim Gavin is into American football. We know that he was into looking at the routes that the wide receivers run and kind of seeing, and I presume that's where like a lot of that came from. Jayo was the basketball stuff, and the basketball stuff reached its apogee versus Tyrone in the semi-final in 2017 when like I'd never seen the V formation that they were using and the kind of ball retention and kind of the midfielders. There was one point in that game where the two midfielders were in the left corner, both of them were like 15 metres apart, like not accidentally. You know, they didn't wander there. It was pre-programmed. They were a little less like that in 2018, possibly because they had to be a little bit less like that because there was no real challenge, and it didn't seem to me like they got up for any of the challenges in 2018. So, look, I don't know. I can't believe that they fell out over the documentary, which is in
we were trying to recall what actually. I mean, having seen it, there was nothing to start me at the time that I thought, Jesus, he's really revealing some in-depth information here.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
I know there's definitely been a sense that the Dublin players wouldn't write books while they were still playing. Philly obviously wrote his, but there's
nothing to do with football.
There's no football in it. So that was like his kind of, look, I'm going to do this. It's not about football. But maybe it's just too much attention ahead of the 5 in a row. Maybe.
But isn't this because like we were just saying earlier on? Actually, this brings attention, like in a way that actually Sherlock staying on doesn't.
Well, is it really that surprising when you take into account the suggestion that there was nobody voluntarily put forward from Dublin for commercial media events at the start of the year? Maybe there's just a clampdown on any sort of stepping out of line at all. And I'm not saying he stepped out of line, I'm just saying any sort of unnecessary exposure on one individual in the camp.
Yeah, although, like, I don't think people think of Jayo as a coach in the backroom team of the current Dublin setup. I think people think of Jason Sherlock as a 1990s phenomenon who reinvented himself in the early 2000s as a different type of footballer and now has had an interesting and varied life. And that was a human interest story as opposed to this is the backroom coach of the team. I'm surprised because to me it looked like he was being groomed to be the successor at some point down the line. Now, Jim did sign a new deal or agree a new deal over the winter, so perhaps there was a sense that his time wasn't going to be for much longer down the line, and it's okay. I'm actually not willing to be second string for 3 or 4 years. This is pure speculation, obviously, because we're in the realms of speculation until Jayo comes.
I'd love to know what had happened. Actually, is one thing. Was this a thing that happened at the back end of last year, or is this because that would? Because what you're saying suggests that almost Jim Gavin had some sort of a plan what you're saying actually suggests that it wasn't so much to do with whatever it was in the documentary or his book, that actually this was a strategical thing by Jim Gavin that remove him out.
I'm saying that I think that there's a point where Jason Sherlock might have thought that he was going to get the big job in 18 months or at the end of the 5 in a row or whatever, and then it becomes clear that you're not, and you're like, okay, well, am I willing to dedicate all this time and effort and resource of my life at a very important stage in my life, you know, like just finished his MBA, change of career, all that kind of stuff in the background. Am I willing to do that voluntarily and not be the
5 in a row?
Yeah, but you're like, I know we all say there's a lot of success to go around, but like, how much of that giant backroom team in Dublin can you actually name?
I was looking at it earlier on, so probably a few of them. But anyway,
I can name the press guy, and I can name Brian Cullen and Declan Darcy. Like, and how much credit do you give those guys when it comes to, is the first thing you go to when Dublin win 5 in a row? Jesus, but that was the best backroom team of all time, lads.
I think
none of those, by the way. Jason Sherlock is the first person you name when you think about that. And also, like, so when he was there, you just mentioned earlier on, and I wanted to come back to it, about what he brought to the team, and that maybe at some point or another that was wrung dry and it moves on. It's to suggest that he wouldn't have had... He would definitely have had the capacity to...
totally, yeah.
Like he's somebody, if we're talking about somebody who watches American sport and feeds into that, like obviously he's somebody who does that, and he would definitely have had the capacity to change the game plan, understand that actually teams have got to grips with this thing of, like Kieran Donaghy spoke about a few years ago, whether this was coming from Sherlock or not. Mark Ingle was the guy that Owen name-checked earlier on, but the sort of ball retention, so we get to a certain stage, you know, the pre-shot clock basketball, where we get to a stage, we advance up the pitch, get to a certain point, can't find a gap, just hold on to the ball for 2 minutes until we find the gap and then go. So what I'm saying is, if he comes in and is part of a team, and I think a pretty central part of a team that introduces those sort of innovations, he isn't just going to do that and then rest on it.
No, and sorry, I'm not suggesting that that he was incapable of changing, but Jim might have felt like need a new voice. Clark has been there, taking the under-21s, taking them in the O'Byrne Cup, getting beaten in the O'Byrne Cup final. Not a black mark on his, it turns out, on his CV. I don't know. Like I do. There's also just a possibility that there was a clash of personalities at the end of it. That they'd spent enough time together. You know, they've obviously known each other since the 90s. It's a funny end to a relationship which was clearly successful. In sport, frequently that happens. Like, and you know, it's up to the manager to pick his backroom team. So
the timing could feel weird as well. But I don't think this is a recent development somehow. I think it's a recent development in the public sphere. Well, there had been some suggestion, you know, he was on the sideline against Monaghan. Somebody like people were spotting that when they were up there and things like that.
We did a bit of work on this story 3 weeks ago, was it? 3 weeks ago?
3 weeks ago, after the first game.
And we're checking like when everybody comes back every year. Everybody doesn't come back at the same time. Like,
that's the thing, so we couldn't be sure.
And so at the time we thought that because he'd been back late previously and other management team members have been back late previously, so it didn't look like it was a big deal. And so let's see, you know, I mean,
it's shite for him, isn't it? It was the one thing that I thought, like, just the main thing actually struck me from the documentary outside of his personal story was how the Fisher was the word I used earlier on, had been there for him post his playing days. Now it didn't end the way he would have wanted it to, and it definitely seems, like we're all saying, we're not sure exactly what happened here, but it seems like as if this is going to be another thing where he's like, oh, Jesus Christ,
maybe
have to end that way.
Yeah, maybe.
Now,
I mean,
before they do the 10 in a row.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, if you know, I think he's got a very strong shout of being a Dublin manager into the future. I also think that if you are the manager of any other county in Ireland, you're straight on the phone going. So the mileage
to Mullingar.
I'm more thinking Newbridge here, but
100%. Yeah, you are right. Like,
yeah,
definitely.
Treason, though, isn't it? Like, Jason Sherlock is still a dub.
Stephen Rochford.
I don't have enough fingers to count the Kerry men who've managed outside their county.
No, but in terms of
beaches.
Okay,
but they all
this
went
is very different. I mean, this is very different. Sorry, the Rochford thing, I was trying to compute in my head what you're actually talking about there. This is completely different. The Dubs are a very individual case of how state secrets actually matter. We haven't a notion what's actually going on here, how they've actually got to this place, the secrets within the Dublin camp.
What's so secret?
Well, I don't know. You tell me. It's a secret because we don't know.
I don't know.
Come on.
I knew what the secrets were. I've been telling you what the secrets were.
It's your best position.
And this Stasi. What's happening? I don't know. You tell me.
Jason Sherlock knows the secrets to how Dublin operate. And
but that's not what like if we're talking about him going like I'm talking about Westmeath, right? Whatever. But like if he goes to Westmeath, he's not going in going, this is what we did with Dublin. He's going like that point about the innovation. He's going, when I'm working with a different set of players. I don't for a second imagine he would go to a Kerry or a Mayo or one of the contenders. I mean, maybe even a Kildare. I don't really believe he would.
Kildare would be a great shout. Cian O'Neill with Jason Sherlock. Cian O'Neill, as somebody who's worked in a third level institution himself, is an academic, I guess you could say, and all that sort of thing. He is just like Jim Gavin in terms of being a sponge for information, is open to a wide range of ideas. And a Jason Sherlock-Cian O'Neill partnership could be the very thing that the Leinster Championship needs to survive beyond 3 years' time.
I mean, okay. He's not playing for them, and he's not bringing Daniel Flynn home from America. So, like, come on. Well, it's still going to be a 15-point spread when those two teams play.
I don't know. I said give it 3 years.
You could put a coaching ticket of Jim McGuinness, Mickey Hart, Mick O'Dwyer at his peak in charge of the pick of Leinster at the moment,
and give it 3 years. Give it 3 years. Give it 3 years.
I don't know if they keep the ball. Like, I don't know if they keep the score to 15 points.
I'm telling you, 2022, you'll all be saying, "Owen told you so."
Well, I mean, maybe we're going to end up with a 5-team championship. Rest of Leinster, Dublin, Kerry, Mayo, and Ulster,
and you just play all the games in Páirc Uí Chaoimh with no Cork involved.
Yeah, perfect.
Now, Ciarán Donahue